Please welcome back to the stage, Max Stein.
Thank you very much. How do we get the electrons into the cars? You need the grid. At some point I did a calculation. If you put 20% efficient solar cells on top of a car, cover the whole surface of the car with these 20% efficient solar cells, you could get about 50 miles worth of range as long as your car's parked outside. But those cells actually turns out they're too expensive. And then also we have Michigan. We don't get quite as much sun all throughout the year. So sadly, we still need the grid. And coordinating, as you saw in one of the previous presentations, getting distributed power management is a problem. So our next panel is going to deal with that. And to moderate that and to introduce the panelists, I would like to welcome on stage Johanna Mathieu. Professor Mathieu is Associate Professor of Electrical Engineering and specializes in grid and power management and distributed asset allocation or something like that. Thank you very much. Johanna Mathieu.
Great, thank you. So today we're going to talk about getting the grid and charging ready. And I'm actually going to, I don't have prepared remarks myself. I'm the moderator of the panel. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers and have them come sit up here. And then each of them will share with you some prepared remarks before we start the panel. So the first panelist is Steve Bratic, Managing Director of both EV Charging Pod and Bratic Enterprise. He's been developing utility-grade EV charging and other large-scale development projects with on-site power generation and energy storage solutions that can minimize strain on the grid. For example, by using alternative fuels and alternative technologies. And then the second, so actually let's welcome Steve first to the stage. So Steve. Thank you. So you can take a seat. And then the second panelist, oh, sorry, I'm talking over the music like they told me not to. The second panelist is Britta Gross, who leads the transportation program at the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI. That is effectively the research arm of the utility industry. Some of you may know her from her many years at General Motors, where she was responsible for the energy strategies required to enable large-scale commercialization of batteries and fuel cell electric vehicles. And in her spare time, Britta is also on the board of the Orlando Electric and Water Utility and a member of the National Academy's Energy Forum. Britta? Thank you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve Bratic, who will introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Stevan Bratic. I am Managing Director and owner of both EV Charging Pod and Bratic Enterprise. Been in business for about 23 years. I have a short presentation talking about EV Charging Pod and some of the wonderful things that we're actually doing. So with that being said, getting to the grid and charging ready, the focus is on alternative solutions to power electric vehicles. So how can we support growth with all of the issues that we have with the grid? So EV Charging Pod and Bratic Enterprise can develop utility-grade EV charging and other large-scale development with on-site power generation and energy storage solutions that can minimize the strain on the grid, and also by using alternative technologies and fuels to generate power. On-site power generation and battery storage. So we're using natural gas, renewable natural gas, which is no fossil fuels, propane, battery energy storage systems, solar, hydrogen, and then also waste to energy. Some of our on-site power generation equipment starts off as low as 15 kilowatts and goes as high as 10 megawatts for reciprocating engines. We're also having discussions and developing some OEM manufacturers up to 50 megawatt turbines. Waste to energy, the hidden, or harnessing the hidden power of waste. So there's a lot of opportunities in being able to use waste to generate electricity. We can use resin byproducts, wood byproducts, wastewater treatment centers, sludge, and of course agricultural waste and tires. All of this can generate prime power electricity on site. There's a lot of other benefits that come with it as well. We can focus on the main area, and that's power generation. There's also carbon credits. There's a lot of opportunity in the waste of the waste, which is also carbon. And if you process it again, it becomes graphene. So those are two cash revenues that could be used to fund the project as well. And then also the reduction in waste cost disposal for the landfills. And then lastly, the reduction of the strain on the grid. With our solar energy, we're using Class A solar panels. Variety of solutions that are out there are long span canopy, standard carport canopies, rooftop, as well as ground mount. Our battery energy storage systems start as low as 100 kW, kilowatts, and up to 5 megawatts. And we're using that in battery backup systems for data centers and or other applications, but we're also using them for EV chargers and then also peak shaving. With that, our batteries are also ITC FEOC compliant. This solution here was actually developed for another university. This is a dual fuel system. We actually developed a hydrogen generation and storage and fueling, as well as EV charging. So ultimately, you're generating the power, the fuel on site, you're storing it, you're fueling the hydrogen vehicles, and then that fuel is also being used to power a hydrogen generator. That hydrogen generator is powering the batteries then power the EV chargers, and then any of the remaining power then goes back to the grid. And that is it. Again, EV Charging Pod and Bratic Enterprise, we're an on-grid and off-grid full-service supplier. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now we'll welcome Britta Gross from EPRI to give her remarks.
Hello, everybody. Okay, first of all, I have to compliment the size and the quality of that screen. I don't know if I've been in a place where they've had such a good quality screen that everybody actually in here, I think, can read the center screen. So really nice job here in equipping this site. Let me just dig right into this. My background, I have some automotive. I sit on the board of Orlando's electric utility. So it's a municipal utility, so it's basically effectively a regulator for the utility. And I work very deeply for many, many years now, and including EPRI with the utility industry. I try to bring all of those viewpoints into how are we going to solve these problems. So I'm completely energized by not only the poster boards yesterday, but also now the conversations all morning, just constantly all morning, taking notes and thinking, okay, that's a really good point. Let me just start by talking about something that has come up a lot today, and that was data centers. I think it only took us 30 minutes into today to talk about data centers. And this, for sure, is a load that's here and now. It's a big load. When EPRI, a different group at EPRI, however, takes a look at where are the loads going to be? What is going to drive growth across the utility industry? Is it coming from transportation? Is it going to come from data centers? This is sort of the analysis that's coming from an expert group at EPRI that looks at all these different industries. And what it shows here is you can see that in the near term, it's all about data centers. See the blue lines down there, a low, medium, and high scenario for data centers. There's a lot of uncertainty there. The transportation load is pretty known, right? We know how many vehicles are on the road today. We know if they all go electric, we know what that starts to look like. And we know the economics and affordability issues. And we calculate what that looks like in, say, 2050. And what you see here is looking at light duty and heavy duty vehicles. In the long run, it's very likely going to be the transportation sector that's going to drive, at least from all that we know today. This is just forecasting. It'll be the transportation loads that actually drive the most load growth. But it also matters where you're looking on the grid. And this is a brand new analysis that's out by EPRI too. I'm going to load you up with just stuff you can go read in your spare time. It's not meant to be understood completely today. It's a brand new study called, I think it's called Powering Intelligence powering intelligence. And what it shows you is across the 50 states, what were the data center loads in each state in 2021? How did it grow to 2024? And what's the projection for 2040 in 2030 in all these different states? Where you don't see a lot of big bubbles on that slide is probably areas that are maybe not so conducive to data centers today. The way we know data centers, looking for water, looking for fiber, all that stuff. So the other states are almost certainly, at least from where we stand today, going to be driven, the load growth is going to be driven by transportation load. So this is what I put in front of utilities all the time. Do not only look at data centers. Keep your eye on the ball in this game here. When it comes to the grid and preparing 3,200 utilities around the United States here, the way the utility industry works today, and it's a heavily regulated industry, and the way it works is, see that vertical gray bar in the middle of that slide? That's the service request. That's almost always when a project first gets started in planning at the utility. You start negotiating, you start looking at pricing. You'll work out all those details in that middle slice. The problem is buildings and developments, housing developments can take 5 years, 2 years, 8 years, 10 years to build. You always had time in the utility industry to respond to a 1 megawatt, a 40 megawatt, a 80 megawatt load. Transportation changes everything because the transportation loads, also unlike data centers, transportation loads, you can buy a fleet of heavy duty Class 8 trucks today and you can have them delivered in 30 days. There's a lot of supply out there in the market. So can a utility respond to a 5 megawatt load in 30 days or half a year? Not probably. 5, 10 megawatts, that's a big load. It takes time. So everything I've been doing at EPRI for 3 years and everything we're trying to do across the industry is how do you drive more information from customers that are electrifying, fleet operators, what's happening in the retail market? How do you drive that information into the hands of utilities so they can do proactive planning, so they can talk to the transmission group, talk to the distribution group, talk to the purchasing group? Do we have long lead transformers that are probably going to need to be put on order? It's all about driving confidence earlier into their hands. Also, the regulators need that confidence as well. So this is a whole game about confidence, what's really happening and when. And I can touch on that in Q&A too when we get there. So EPRI, we designed 2 tools over the last 3 years. I was very focused on what needs to happen to more unify the utility industry so that if Pepsi is looking to electrify its fleet across of trucks around the country, they know how to reach the utility industry. It can speed up. We can get to scale much faster. And so one tool is the eRoadMAP tool. It's publicly available. It's fun to use. It's a map. Everybody loves maps. It's interactive. You can see for yourself the data on this thing. It was a very complicated tool, but it is the communication tool. Where do you look for as good an estimate, as good as actually some actual data from fleet operators like the Pepsis of the world and the Tesla charging network and their plans for deploying the network? All is in there. It's integrated in one big, deep, rich database of much data to let you know where and when loads are going to show up on the grid. And this is the data that's in there. I'm teasing you with some slides and some information just for you to know that our work is very well researched. We spend a lot of time connecting dots across multiple industries to see what's it going to take to get to scale. And you can see even we're making updates there on the very right-hand side of the slide. Updates, anytime we see gaps, we're working very closely with NREL and other national labs. When we have a gap, for example, behind the fence, ground system equipment, what do they think the electrification needs are behind the fence? We get data from NREL, we pop it into the eRoadMAP, integrate it carefully, no double counting or undercounting, and we end up with a tool that just keeps living and breathing. This is what eRoadMAP looks like. I really want to you can go into the eRoadMAP and zoom down to a 0.28 square mile area. It sort of hides a little bit the identity of who the customer might be in that area. And that was a key. That was sensitivity around data is really important in a competitive environment like fleet operators and automakers and stuff. And so you can zoom down into there. Over time, what is the load projected this year, next year, 4 years, 8 years, or when everything's electrified? What's really super interesting about the tool too is we have also for the first time used this platform to integrate every available hosting capacity map we can find from the utility industry. So we've got about 21 integrated now. You can see that in some cases we have circuit diagrams where it's the feeder itself and you can click on that line and figure out, oh, what's the status today? say at Con Ed or over at BGE in Baltimore. And it'll tell you, yeah, there's 1 megawatt of spare capacity on that grid today, or 4 or 2.5 or 0. And that gives these fleet operators, customers with big loads, an idea of how to prioritize their electrification projects. They also want it to go easy. They want to go where there's spare capacity. It makes everyone's life easy. So I point out that it's there. We can also take data from utilities that are a little bit less willing to hand over circuit diagrams or feeder networks. We can also do sort of square boxes and whatever they want. The trick is, or the key is, to get this information early in front of the fleet operators or the operators that have big loads coming on the grid as well. And so the other tool that's sort of a sister tool to eRoadMAP, which is public, it was for the communication ability. eRoadMAP's been cited like 14 or 15 times in either state regulatory proceedings or also legislative proceedings as well. It's come to be known across the utility industry as a really citable source of real good data. GridFAST is the secret tool that kind of accompanies it, but we won't divulge who's providing data. And so if you imagine, GridFAST just launched a couple months ago. If you imagine now that every large customer with large electrification load, transportation load, is sharing their Excel spreadsheet of what's the address of the site, what's the load projected, what year are they going to deploy electric trucks at that site, that's what gets uploaded into a cloud-based system here, and we share that only with the matched utility. And this is what we're trying to do to standardize that industry and get everyone working together. To build GridFAST, we interviewed everybody in the industry. We had a hunch of everything, but we interviewed again, charging providers, fleet operators, utilities. What goes wrong when you're trying to interconnect and do a service request with the utility industry? Why does it take so long? Why does it take 18 months? Why can't it be done in 3 weeks? We found out all these different issues. Some are just the fleet data we get is very speculative. It's not really real. We don't know if it's confident or not. On the utility side, yeah, they don't have visibility, et cetera, et cetera. So just to know, we investigated the heck out of what a tool would have to do if it's going to do a good job of moving operators and planners and developers with charging projects into the hands of the utilities years in advance, not just with the service request, 6 months before the need. A utility view, you can just, again, I put some of these charts in here for your leisure, and I think this is my last slide. This was important for the big customers, the Walmarts, the Teslas, the Amazons, the Pepsis, and the FedExes, et cetera, of the world. When we asked them, hey, all you need to do is start using this tool to proactively move your information secretively, confidentially, into an instrument, into this platform that will share only with the matching utilities. So they can start to aggregate your loads all together and act on that plan because they know it's coming directly from you. They said, well, what assurances can you give me that the utility industry will actually use the data we're giving to you? Fair enough. So we interviewed 17 utilities were surveyed for this work. We gave them about 15 different things they could do with this data we thought would be very valuable in how to use charging operators information about when that 2 megawatt load is coming and so on, and maybe what the use case is at that site. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised. I thought, okay, they're lukewarm. They don't really want to do anything, whatever. 75% of the utilities we surveyed said, well, you know what, 4 of those things we definitely would do. We'd tell transmission. We'd tell the distribution planning group. We'd tell a procurement group. We'd incorporate fleet plans into planning scenarios, et cetera, et cetera. And another 50% of those said, you know what, we'll also do another 5 things on your list. That's right. This is executive overview. This is great for planning purposes. We might even use it to prioritize some of our capacity constrained sites on the grid. So this is just a way to say, hey, all you fleet operators and charging operators out there, there is receptivity on the utility side. They also know they want to go faster. But without confidence, without information, it is really hard to act. And for sure, it's hard for a regulator to unleash the ability for utilities to go invest in these things when they're not quite sure what's going on. And with that, I'll leave it for Q&A, and very happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both for your comments. That was super useful. And I think you're both coming at this challenge from different perspectives. And it would be very interesting to hear your complementary perspectives on this topic. We also learned a lot earlier today about grid EV interaction. I think because the data center topic is so front and foremost in the media now, everybody's framing a lot of their work with respect to the grid. with having to talk about data centers versus whatever they were working on. So I want to highlight that, but maybe we'll come back and not start with data centers because we're here to talk about electric vehicles. And I first wanted to just ask, we've heard a lot about the different EV challenges to the grid. What do you think is the key challenge that we need to address, especially in the near term and maybe in the longer term for the researchers in the room to think about what they could be working on? And how is the challenge different based on the type of charging? So like residential charging, we've talked about fleet charging, public EV charging stations and so forth, because I think you've worked on this from different perspectives. So maybe Steven, you can start first and then we'll go to Britta.
Thank you. Yeah, I've definitely had some direct experiences when it comes to infrastructure, not having enough power at a given site. It depends on the location, and it also depends on if you're going to use level 2 chargers, 240 volt versus a 480 volt, which is industrial grade. That's been probably the biggest difficulty is the level 3 charging. Trying to have 3-phase power in a commercial or a residential area. And there isn't the infrastructure there. And it's $1 million a mile to bring that power and new lines or upgrading the lines to that given location as a minimum. So having the data that Britta had just presented, I think it would be a phenomenal opportunity to expedite. Even now, I've got a couple of charging stations. I won't disclose the utility, but with that, the process is really difficult too. You have to go out there, you have to fill out an application, then you go and have to fill out another application just to get all the same information. And you just want to know, is there 3-phase power available in this area? And then lastly, in many cases, the utilities will come back and say, well, we want you to do a design, and we're not going to spend the money to do the design. We're just going to generate our own power. So, we're going to circumvent the whole process. And that's what we have to do, to be able to move forward and be progressive. Because in even bringing the power to a given location, the time it takes. In some cases, it could be 3, even up to 5 years to bring 3-phase power to a location that either needs to be upgraded and or doesn't have any 3-phase power.
Thank you. Britta?
So that was a long question. There are a lot of pieces in there, but I'll try to remember the second part. I basically heard 2 things. One is, what are the challenges out there? And I would just say, for me, the biggest challenge is the uncertainty. And I talked a little bit about just lack of confidence. And I will just say that when there are clear regulations in place, then everybody knows, okay, well, this is the law, and this is what has to happen by 2028. Here's what has to happen by 2030. And they may be very aggressive, but utilities actually could use that, and regulators could use that to say, here's what's very likely going to happen. This is what we all have to be prepared for. In a current environment, it's a lot harder to know, okay, if this is on, this is what a key point I wanted to get across to everyone doing the poster boards and everyone thinking about work to go forward. It has really become a TCO, total cost of ownership and affordability right now. When you don't have to do something, and notwithstanding John McElroy's presentation last night, if you were lucky enough to hear it, about the importance and the significance to the auto industry, maybe even trucking industry, to go electric for competitive global reasons. Without the regulations and without knowing that we really have to do this, folks, we really have to do this for the manufacturing in this country and for jobs, that we are going to have to, we're just going to have to kind of look at the affordability. Everything we do is it more affordable? How do we get cost out of these systems, out of interconnections, out of, Jason talked about this too at Eaton. How do you scale up these things to just bring that to our advantage? Because that's clearly where the mentality is. To the second question about, I think, just sort of charging levels and what makes it difficult. So I'm here to say, because no one ever wants to talk about this part, but I have been driving an EV since, I think, 2010, and different kinds of EVs, and I have only ever used level 1 at home. I know everyone hates this. It is possible to plug in an EV and meet all of my needs with a level 1 charger at home. So I think we did, unfortunately, make some mistakes a few years ago in the beginning, making things so complicated, like how hard is this and why are we doing this? And it really can be that easy. Level 1 for me and my 2 daughters, we all 3 drive electric vehicles. The challenge, of course, is on the other loads. What do you do in multi-dwelling units? That is very difficult because there are all kinds of HOA rules and apartment rules and stuff. That one is a perennial challenge. I wish that building codes just overnight would fix that problem. Demand it, make sure that every parking spot has an outlet, at least an outlet. I bet we could get a lot further with just outlets that are very inexpensive. DC fast charging is, of course, the tougher nut of all of this. It's a big load. It gets bigger and bigger. There was a trend for a while, 19.2, because that's the maximum AC level to charging level. And I think now that's backed off. I think there were a lot of costs involved in that. But I think now sort of the average out there for residential market is, I think, 11.2 kW from most of the manufacturers, if my data is the same as all of you. So those loads can stack up too if you're on a cul-de-sac and 8 houses are sharing one single transformer. So there's a lot to be done there. But of course, confidence in knowing where and when these loads are going to show up is really the beast at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you have further thoughts on, so if we fix all kind of these near-term issues, I mean, that's a big assumption, in 5-10 years, what's coming next for the major challenges?
It's going to be continuing the growth with everything else going on in the industry, technology growth, manufacturing growth, data centers. It's going to eat up all of the remaining power that's out there. If we're not working with the utilities to help develop on-site power generation and battery storage for the charging stations, there's not going to be any power left.
So on the generation side, we need to just build more to satisfy the entire load in the system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is where the EVs shine, right? Transportation shines. Forget about fleets that have to deliver goods to our doorsteps. But residential vehicles, right? They're parked almost all the time. They're either at work or primarily at home. And this is where actually there's a lot of grid capacity, or let's just say it differently. There's not a lot of grid capacity for level loads like data centers that need to operate maybe 24 hours a day. There's not a lot of peak excess capacity. Why would you spend money and build excess capacity? But for vehicles that can often use those big valleys that every utility experiences almost all year long, almost every evening, early morning, evening, there is plenty of capacity on the grid to use those valleys on the grid to just absorb as much charging energy as you can into the vehicles. And we have to get there. That's the 5 to 10 year challenge, is figuring out how to take advantage of the opportunity to shift all of our charging to those valleys on the grid. And to do that, we're going to have to talk a lot more about standardization and how vehicles actually charge and how we know they're charging when they're charging. So, but maybe for another question.
And I think to add to that, I think there's some an opportunity here where the utilities can actually look at distributed power. So having just batteries, charging those batteries during the evening and being able to use that during the day as well can help to offset a lot of that strain on the grid.
I agree. Yeah. So you're framing this EVs also, with respect to integration in the grid as also an opportunity because there's a huge flexible load there. I think you were alluding to managed charging or coordinated charging. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about those sorts of opportunities that you see going forward and how EVs can be seen as a resource. I mean, I think one of the prior talks mentioned this concept of a virtual power plant, for instance. And so in that sense, does it help address some of the major challenges we're talking about today, especially with respect to the data center conversation or other conversations?
I think the next generation is going to be solid state battery. So, you'll be able to charge a lot faster. It's a lighter weight vehicle. You can essentially double your mileage versus a standard lithium ion. I think that's going to be a great benefit with respect to the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's clearly a lot of potential. I mean, the theory, the theory behind it is absolutely solid, right? You got a valley on the grid. EVs could come in there. They park 95% of the time in a driveway. If we can just capture that and either put power to absorb the energy then and then put it back on the grid, put it back on a building, put it back on your hair dryer, whatever you want the next day, that's actually perfect. I think that there are some, and I hate to get I don't want to be the downer sometimes on just how hard some of this is. But we are going to have to talk about standardization because 3,200 utilities, I don't know, 17 different ISOs, grid operators, different fuels in the whole mix on the grid, and then 40 different automakers that are doing electric vehicles and whatnot. And it's just, it's a real challenge to get everyone pointed in the same direction, to sort of standardize their parts of the equation. You don't have to have a unique API. Can't we just all do the same API to grab this data? Can't the automakers just share all the data? But everybody does want to sort out, I'm going to go back to the revenue and affordability, revenue stream and opportunity here. Everyone's trying to figure out, it's not just greedy, it's not just how do we make money, it's everything costs money too. It costs money to collect the data, store the data on a cloud, send that data down to a utility, et cetera, for grid operator, whatever you're going to do with it. So there's just a lot of practical requirements. I mean, I'll just give you one example because now I'm being the downer already. And these are problems that need to be solved. You know, we've done some work at EPRI, and I think we've seen it in a number of several pilot demonstrations when you really start looking at the signals that are coming out of the vehicles. Using vehicle telemetry to ultimately manage the charging of those vehicles and when maybe they're providing power to the grid or responding to demand signals from the utility or the grid operator to stop charging is a really beautiful on paper, and it's great. If we could get that working, it'd be great. But even the way the vehicles are designed today, they measure, they communicate and measure the power in, power out at different places on the vehicle, and you sometimes have it lumped with other ancillary loads, and it's not ready for prime time yet. So we've got to like even step up our willingness to work on some kind of standardization across the way the vehicles collect this data, because it's got to be revenue grade. For a regulator's not going to allow this stuff to happen if it's not revenue grade. And then on the utility side, the same thing. It just can't always be custom. I know we all have our business processes and we got our software and we all have our metering equipment down there, but somehow we have got to find ways to standardize and accept a way to sort of work together in shared portals, for example, to meet each other all halfway, because then we could realize, I am confident we could realize this, and maybe that's that thinking that John McElroy talked about yesterday. We have to think ourselves quickly out of the problems we're in right now.
And the key factor that he said last night was having common use components for multiple types of vehicles. So same thing for the infrastructure, the grid, and the utilities to be able to standardize as well. So I agree with you 110%.
Yeah, well put. I have a follow-up question about that, actually a separate one for each of you, trying to tie that back to your presentation. So Britta, I'll start with you. When you think about this sort of managed charging and enabling all of this, assuming we can get past the standardization and get it to work, how does that interact with hosting capacity maps? How do we need to rethink how we design them? Because now the electric vehicle load isn't something that is just happening. It's something we can influence.
So for me, for right now, it was monumental to get 21 utility load hosting capacity, not solar panel supporting, load hosting. If you've got a load coming in, what's the capacity on the grid? And California mandates it, New York mandates it pretty much. I think Michigan's talking about it. I think we're pretty close to maybe having some information like that from Michigan. But I think that when we talk about load hosting capacity maps, I wasn't actually imagining that it is a real-time tool. I don't know if, so that, she just notched it up. She's ratcheted up this a notch. This is really good. For me, it's a planning instrument. It's just for Pepsi to know when they go look at their 500, bottling sites or truck, distribution sites around the country where they got to pick up a lot of Pepsi and move it around with these Class 8 trucks. They could just grab a glance at data that's only 3 months old. What at the time was the capacity at outside the doorsteps of each one of my bottling plants? Is it positive? Is it zero? Or is it, 15 megawatts? Let me just go, done deal. I'll go over there and talk to them. I'll just put my service request in, or I'll at least, pick up or share my data over here, and they can start doing their calculations already because this is my load. So I was envisioning hosting capacity, sharing the maps, because I think I'm just wondering how hard that would be, but I'm not going to write it out of the whole possibility here. But for me, it's again, proactive, planning, confidence. Let's know what we're talking about here. Let's know the rate, the pace of which this is happening. And again, it's not like a data center. I guess I'll get to my data center point too. Data centers, they go shop around for the site, right? You go shop around for the right rate. You go look for the, what kind of equipment you need, the fiber, the water, whatever you need. it's very different trucks and cars, right? We drive all over the country. The chargers could appear anywhere. You could decide to put in a big megawatt charging station anywhere on the highway, rural roads, and that's what the load will be. And so transportation, this is cool to work in this space, isn't it? Because the challenges are just unlimited, but really exciting to try to address. And so transportation loads can arrive anywhere. You'll need the load served, ideally 3 months, 6 months. What are we going to do to match the interests of all these parties and get away from these unmatched timelines or mismatched timelines?
Yeah, thank you for sharing on that and speculating. I know I put you on the spot a bit because it's a little out of the scope of a hosting capacity map, but I think that it's kind of natural to think about this when we go forward, when we actually can control these loads more effectively. And then Steven, kind of like a parallel question there is, when you do, if we do enable more managed charging, coordinated charging, how does that affect the design of your systems that are largely like behind the meter to enable charging? Because can you right size them better? Can you reduce the size and the capital costs because you're also coordinating the vehicle charging?
I think there's definitely some opportunity, especially if we can use some of the waste heat from the engines or the turbines. To repurpose it and get free HVAC. I think it works very similar to your heating and cooling system in your car with respect to a reciprocating engine. But at the end of the day, right sizing when it comes to wattage, power is power, right? So if you're going to do, a 300 kW chargers, so you got a max load of 600 kW, you're going to need, a battery system that's going to be equivalent to that, and then, the corresponding generator is going to be powering that. So it's going to be pretty consistent. There's not going to be a whole lot of flexibility unless you wanted to get into items that are going to allow for faster speeds and or even higher megawatt types of solutions, and how you're going to distribute that. But I personally think that their efficiencies are really going to come through generating the power to the battery. The battery is going to hold all the loads. It's going to give the chargers a clean power, and then at the same time, though, it's only going to use the power that it needs. And when you right size the battery to the chargers, once that battery gets down to a certain threshold, then those generators then can recharge those batteries at an efficient rate, so that you're not going to drop off and lose power as well. So there's a lot of efficiencies that are there, but there's not a whole lot of consistencies. Every project's pretty unique and custom.
I could comment on that a little bit too. I think that when the pressure was really on with a lot of targets and mandates that had to be met by 2030, really in the broader interest of industry. When the pressure was on, there were a lot of fleet operators and utilities looking for faster solutions. So certainly working off-grid solutions is absolutely a place to go. The other place I'll say that has gotten a lot of attention, certainly in California, are two programs that PG&E and Southern California Edison offer, and these are flexible interconnection solutions, where in their nomenclature, what they mean by flexible interconnection is that we're the utility. We will 365 days a year, most hours of every day, we can serve your full, just say it's a 10 megawatt load at a site, 2 megawatt load, pick your number. But at that location, there could be 16 hours a year that we estimate would be problematic. Hot afternoon August, or a cold morning in the winter, et cetera. And for those, they say, look, we'll give you a preferred rate, but know that during those limited hours, you won't be able to get your full power at that site. You'll get maybe 1 megawatt, but not your 2, 1.5, and not your 8, whatever it is. And so that idea, and all the academics out here who want to think about some of these solutions too, I think it's really worthwhile thinking about. There is such a big valley of generation on the grid that was just underutilized grid. But boy, everything's designed for the peaks. A few hours a year. It depends where you are. Tennessee Valley is probably early morning peak. California, probably an early evening peak, 7 o'clock at night or so now. And so it's really an intriguing question, but flexible interconnection is part of this equation too.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up flexible interconnection, because that's also been in the news a lot recently with respect to data centers. And so we've touched on this quite a bit recently, talking about data centers. But I do wonder if you could speak a little bit about how data centers are elevating some of the common issues across interconnection of any large load, which could be EVs, or it could be electrifying heating, for instance, like heat pumps. We were talking about that a few years ago too, as a major new load in the system, right? So because data centers are making these issues, front and foremost, is it helping open up things for EVs too, in a way that it's actually complementary, that we're doing these things together, electrifying vehicles and building out data centers? Or do you see it mainly as competition?
I think that they're definitely complementing each other. The key thing is making sure that they're going. If it is grid tied, okay, a lot of these data centers now are building their data centers next to a decommissioned power plant, nuclear or what have you, and then recommissioning it, and that's going to be a direct load for that data center. But anything that's tied to the grid, if designed properly and having that additional power designed into future growth, that's where really the benefit's going to be, instead of waiting for rate hikes or other variables to be able to get things approved, or going to the board of directors. Pre-plan and make sure that there's enough volume and capacity for future growth as well. That's where the benefits can be.
So I'm going to use the answer I hate. It depends. Whoever had that on the slide this morning. I don't know. I think it depends, because I hear the bad and the good. I mean, some of the bad is just even the availability of transformers. We had COVID problem transformers, right? And working only one shift, and that really was problematic for the whole industry. Now it's the big data centers are grabbing, a lot of the same equipment, the same vendors for the big transformers that they need. And it's still hard for utilities, municipal utilities and others, to get a hold of just quickly transformers to do business. So there's a tug for limited resources, limited vendors, limited production, although maybe Eden's building more plants to accommodate maybe more transformer builds. On the other hand, obviously there's a lot of willingness because it feels like there's a lot of money behind it, attention by regulators and consumer advocates too, looking at the data center loads and saying, well, how hard is it? It's really not that hard after all to do a 100 megawatt load. Look, it goes as fast, 2 years we can get it done. And so you'd think that it would be driving confidence into the rest, but still, I don't know if we've crossed the chasm yet. I don't know if we've sort of connected the dots tightly enough. And I think I'm putting my band in that. I'm connecting my band to the data center band too, because everybody's looking there. Regulators have bought it, and I'm going to hitch my ride to that wagon as well, because I think that there's something there. So for sure.
Yeah, thank you for your perspectives on that. I've heard a lot of diverse views on that point, so it's helpful to know. So we're almost out of time, and I just want to end with asking you both, what is the key thing you want people to remember when they think about EV integration on the grid and the main? How do we keep our eye on the prize? Is that the phrase? Yeah. What is the key thing we need to solve? What is the key?
I think it's really working with the Michigan Public Service Commission and making sure that they know that this is not just about the state, it's about the people. The people need to not be impacted. We have enough brownouts and blackouts right now, and then with data centers, we don't know what impact that's going to come down the road. So we really need their support. We need the state of Michigan, the government, the governor, to support all these activities in growth, because we need the growth for progression.
Yeah, I think EVs are going to happen. They're great. They're fantastic to drive. I'll never go back again. So they're going to happen, and they frankly have to happen for this country, or we're in a lot of trouble here. So the question is, we can do it the hard way, or we can do it a little bit easier way. And the one is just align the boats all in the same direction, and let's start pressing forward. That said, easily, affordability is a challenge, also politically with rates and stuff like that. And so we do have to think about what is the most cost-effective way to do all of this. And so I would maybe I'm just going to triple down on affordability and the cost of doing things. And what are the best, if we're going to do this, what would we be doing different today to get to that vision in 5 or 10 years? and have spent less money doing it, and especially on consumers and rates.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for participating in this panel and for all your insights that you shared with us. I think we have lunch next. Is that right? Okay. Yes. But Alan says lunch. Okay, great. So we will break for lunch. But before we do that, let's give these wonderful people a round of applause.